Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Jess Thompson, and I am one of the board members here at the Historical Society. And it is my absolute pleasure today to introduce and tell you a little bit about our speaker, Mr. Bill Speiden, who is someone that I have looked up to my entire life because I've known him since I was a very small child. Bill has lived in Orange County since 1937, arriving with his parents at the age of 6 months. He had a 40-year career of operating Hampstead Farm in Somerset and has contributed to the community in the J.C.'s, Planning Commission, Culpeper Soil and Water Conservation Board, Piedmont Environmental Council, Lewis and Clark Exploratory Center Board, Orange County Farm Bureau as a legislative director, and member of the Historical Society. He has done daily weather observations for NOAA for over 60 years. His avocations include teaching history with Ollie, working and demonstrating oxen and their history in America. My two favorites were always salt and pepper. Those were the ones from when I was a kid that I remember so well, including 2 Western Trail adventures to reenact the Oregon and Bozeman trails and horsepacking trips in the American West. Bill will now tell us about the saga of Sandra's acquiring a pipe having belonged to Sitting Bull and her 17-year effort to find a descendant of Sitting Bull in order to gift it back to their family. Please welcome Mr. Bill Speiden.
Thank you, Jesse. Matika Kui Osatin. What's that mean? Excuse my southern accent. That's as close as I can get it in Lakota. It means all my relations. We are all related. It's said and recognized on many occasions, including entering a sweat lodge or starting meetings. This phrase is often said in prayer and ceremonies as acknowledgement that everything is related from people to plants and animals. Slide number 1, pipe. Notice it doesn't say peace pipe. Peace pipe is a white man's term. The pipe is used, the storage protocol for a pipe is to be separated unless it's in use on red felt cloth and a bed of sage or sweetgrass. They're only connected when in use. It is used for many purposes other than a peaceful deal. It was used during ceremonies, going to war, returning from war, passage of various rites, etc. The Sioux language was spoken in Central Virginia, and that the other languages are Iroquoian and what is this thing? Yeah, Iroquoian and Algonquin in the pink. Algonquin ran from North Carolina all the way up into Canada. We're going to start with General Rossiter. Rosser of the General Rosser is in the middle there. Major General Rosser of the Confederate Army. And the characters in this, I will start with Major General Thomas Rosser. Rosser grew up in Texas after his family moved there from Virginia. Just before he graduated from West Point, he opted to join the Confederate States Army as Texas seceded from the Union. He was one of 22 West Point cadets to join the Confederacy. His best friend and West Point roommate was Second Lieutenant at the time George Armstrong Custer. During the war, both Rosser and Custer became renowned military officers, and both rose to the rank of Major General. They met several times in the battlefield, with Rosser being the winner at least as often as Custer. Rosser was wounded for the 3rd time at the Battle of Trevilian Station down here in Louisa County. The Trevilian Station battle was a mixed victory for both sides. Who won depends on which account you read. By this time, June 1864, both Custer and Rosser had been promoted to Brigadier General in their respective armies. Later, both were promoted to Major General. After the war, Rosser wrote his friend Custer asking if he would help get him a job. He was a civil engineer by West Point training. Rosser got a job to work on a surveying team for the Union Pacific Railroad, now across North Dakota. By the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1851, this was Indian territory and whites needed Indian permission to be there, theoretically. At lunch break one day, the survey crew found themselves surrounded by Lakota Indians. Their leader was Sitting Bull, who could have easily wiped out the surveyors, a small party of 12 to 14. It was a hunting party, though, and not a war party. Sitting Bull knew that if he did, the reprisal would be by the U.S. Army would be disastrous for his people, and let the crew carry on. After working in the Canadian Pacific Railroad as chief engineer, which he did after the Union Pacific was completed, Rosser retired to Charlottesville, Virginia, where he was postmaster and farmed in the now Rugby Road area. Now we're going to go to Major General Custer, was lieutenant at the time. I guess you can pick out which one is his. He graduated from West Point in 1861 at the bottom of his class and then served in the U.S. Army Cavalry. He distinguished himself as an aggressive cavalry leader, promoted to brigadier general at 23 years old. Soon after Lee surrendered Appomattox, Custer was promoted to brevet major general in the U.S. Army and oversaw the dismantlement of the U.S. Army Volunteers. His regular Army rank was major, and he then carried the rank of lieutenant colonel commanding the 7th Cavalry fighting Indians out west. His friendship with General Rosser continued till after the Civil War, and he helped Rosser get a job on the Union Pacific. The next one is, guess who this one is? Tatankak Ivutaki. Some more Lakota with a southern accent. Anybody know who that would be? That would be Sitting Bull. He was Sioux-speaking Lakota and chief of the Hunkpapa Band of Lakota under the Council Fire Teton. Sitting Bull's log cabin was on the Grand River within the Standing Rock Reservation. He and Crazy Horse were central leaders in the combined encampment of Lakota, Dakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho Indians at the Little Bighorn on the Crow Reservation in June 1876. That and following treaties allowed wagon trains unthreatened passage and guaranteed the Indians their hunting grounds. Also, the United States citizens legally needed Indian permission to be on said reservations. After the U.S. government was denied the sale of Black Hills, sacred to the Lakota, and pressures continued to mount to force the Indians to live on their reservations. Tensions mounted. Custer with 700 cavalrymen and scouts took on roughly 2,000 warriors. True to a previous vision of Sitting Bull, Custer and his cavalrymen were annihilated at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Pressures increased on the Indians so that Sitting Bull in 1877, 58 lodges of the Hunkpapa Band of the Teton Council Fire and over 1,000 of their horses fled to Canada. By that time, it was estimated the Lakotas from several subgroups who previously moved up there, up to Canada, had 2,900 people, 500 men, 1,000 women, 1,400 children, along with about 3,500 horses and 30 U.S. government mules. They borrowed them. The Queen told them that they were welcome and would not be harassed by the Canadian government, but neither would the government support them. 4 years later in 1881, after enduring these severe Canadian winters, Sitting Bull surrendered to the U.S. government to save the lives of his people and came back to the Standing Rock Reservation. The next player in our saga was Ron His Horse's Thunder, president of Sitting Bull Community College at Fort Yates, now North Dakota. Ron grew up in New York State, speaking English, but learned Lakota after moving from New York to North Dakota after high school. He was Lakota of the Hunkpah Band and is great-great-great-grandson of Sitting Bull. After high school, he went back to North Dakota to finish his education to serve the Lakota people. He received his law degree from the University of South Dakota, thinking the law degree would open opportunities for him. After several activist roles within the tribe, he served as president of Sitting Bull College for over a decade. His goal was to develop a $20 million campus, which he did. From there, he served a 4-year term as chairman of the Standing Rock Reservation, containing 3,600 square miles, 3,600 square miles and a population of 8,200, with a total enrollment in the Hunkpawpaws was 15,600 as the number is scattered around. For example, I've worked my oxen at Virginia State Fair for 15 years. And there, in the Indian encampment they had there was a Hunkpawpaw there. And he came over in 1932, as his family did to hopefully to live a better life. He was a bulldozer operator. So the Indians that scattered around and a lot immersed into our civilization, including those living off the reservation, 15,000. He continues to serve his people in various capacities, such as 2002, G.W. Bush appointed him chairman of the advisor for the tribal colleges and universities. Sitting Bull College is one of 35 colleges and universities on Indian reservations in this country today. Now, of these, you can probably pick out which one is Sandra. This is my first wife, business partner, mother of 2 sons, friend for 44 years. She did the books for my dairy and beef operation and did well keeping me out of jail. There was no task on the farm she would not participate in when needed, from driving tractors to milking cows. During the 1870s, she took on the uranium industry with one Piedmont Environmental Council part-time lobbyist, and a 4-year effort resulted in a moratorium on uranium mining and milling in Virginia, which is still in effect today. This moratorium was recently supported by both state and national Supreme Courts just in the last 2 years. So that battle stayed on until 2 years ago. She became Indian in finding Indian artifacts and observing a farmhand spot spear points from the tractor seat. She realized that a collection of spear points in a shoebox had added nothing to the history of said points represented. She learned how to find and identify sites after checking with the Archaeology Department of the University of Virginia and the Virginia Division of Historic Landmarks. In 1986, Mark Ruskowski of the Virginia Department of Historic Landmarks wrote a paper on the contributions of avocational archaeologists on the repertoire of Paleo-Indian history in Virginia. In 9 years, she found close to 180 paleo sites on about 7,000 acres surveyed with enough marked artifacts to register them with the Virginia Department of Historic Landmarks. He wrote in the report, "The wealth of information provided by Mrs. Speiden's survey has multiplied the research base here in Orange County more than tenfold." She headed up the Stagara mine in Mound Dig in 1979 and 1980, one of 2 known Indian burial mounds in central Virginia. This one was sponsored by the Orange Historical Society. Several of you remember having been involved in this dig. How many here? I see 1, 2, 3. Yeah. See, Dave Garvin, he lives right next door to it. And Harrison, and who was the other one? I thought there were 3. Huh? Oh, yeah. You're not raising your hand high enough. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and she included over 120 participants in the extensive, several months long project. She raised the money needed to buy several core sites in Thunderbird, a paleo site in Warren County in the Shenandoah River, which were in a housing development. For this effort, she received the Governor's Environmental Excellence Award in 1991. She also cited not only 12,000-year-old Indian sites, but also citing a slave cemetery, several Civil War cannon emplacements and breastworks, an old inn site, and created the Hampstead Archaeological District. Comico, Chief Powhatan's governmental village site in Powhatan County, was placed under protective easement using some of her legacy to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. Other recognitions for Sandra for community, state, and national North American interests include Sandra Speiden Boardroom at Sitting Bull College in North Dakota, Sandra and Bill Speiden Laboratory being built on the Archaeological Society of Virginia headquarters in Kitawayne, and the Manor House in Museum in Charles City, Virginia. Orange County Free Clinic waiting room, James Madison Museum Orange, and our own Historical Society. All right, now get down to the nitty-gritty. Saga of the pipe. Back in the 1970s, Thomas Ross's granddaughter was living in Charlottesville. Having moved to a nursing home, she had a house content sale. Among the items listed was an Indian headdress and other Indian items. Sandra, who would not buy an Indian artifact to own it, knowing the ugly circumstances under which most were acquired by the whites. She went to this sale and bought a pipe. She was 99.9% sure it was Sitting Bull's. It was made of redstone or catlinite, and which only comes from one quarry in the country in Minnesota. She also knew that while in Canada, Rosser, then chief engineer for building the Canadian Pacific Railroad, again ran into Sitting Bull and his bands in winter in near starving condition. Remembering that Sitting Bull had spared him several years earlier, he opened the food supplies of the Canadian Pacific Railroad and kept several hundred Indians from extreme hunger that winter. Living his religion, Sitting Bull honoring the Sioux 7 virtues, this one being generosity, gave him what he could in thanks. Other items in the sale included the pipe. Sandra bought it with the intention of returning it to the Sitting Bull family. On 2 occasions, our youngest son, then attending VPI, went out to Pine Ridge Reservation in southern South Dakota to do summer construction work on the reservation. Both summers, he brought the pipe back home, not finding any descendants of Sitting Bull. 17 years after her purchase, the Smithsonian Museum in Washington was opening the Native American Museum branch there. Time magazine ran a story about the opening and mentioning Ron McNeil, great-great-grandson of Sitting Bull and president of Sitting Bull College. In North Dakota would be, in Sitting Bull College, North Dakota, would be attending the several days powwow celebrating the museum opening. Sandra was ecstatic, not wanting to email him, call him, or write him. She attended the powwow with the goal of seeing him in person and telling him of her intention with the pipe. Sandra, not easily persuaded from a goal, managed to get an invitation to have breakfast with him with Ron McNeil the second morning. He was greatly touched by her offer of returning the pipe, which is a sacred item for the Native Americans. He told Sandra of the Bigfoot reenactment that December. Not being able to grieve their losses in 1890 after Wounded Knee, the last major battle of the Indian Wars, a horseback reenactment was started in 1986 at Sitting Bull's cabin site where he was killed, December 15, 1890. Helping for better treatment by the Red Cloud Agency in the now southern South Dakota near the Wounded Knee site. Sitting Bull, a Hunkpapa Lakota band, joined Bigfoot's band. Bigfoot was a Minnewachu band chief for the 300-mile trek, then known as the Bigfoot Ride. Now it's called the Future Generations Ride, in recognition of the ride's education value for young Lakota. We were invited to bring the pipe out on our horses and join the ride in December in 2002. On arriving home, she asked me if I'd like to go. About 2.5 seconds later, I said, hell yeah, let's go. We did. She was 63 and I was 65, and the aid of our eldest son, Leith, who came out to help us with the horses and drive the truck and trailer while we rode. At Sitting Bull's cabin site on the Grand River just before the ride, Ron's mother, Ina McNeil, gave a picnic lunch for the 60 or so people there. 35 started on the reenactment. The rest are there to send us off. There were 2 Caucasian females, and I was the only Caucasian male on the trip. At the end of the ride, at the Wounded Knee site, there were over 200 riders and a funeral entourage of about 60 cars. We kept adding riders along the 300-mile trek. At the beginning and end of every day's ride, overlooking horse, the spiritual leader, gave prayers and a short sermon in both Lakota and English. The subject matter was mostly some history, recognition of famous Lakota, and essentially the Golden Rule. Slide 4. Okay, there is Sandra giving the pipe to Ron McNeil, and right behind her, you can barely see a fellow by the name of Virgil Killstreet. He is from the Pine Ridge Reservation. He is a descendant of one of only 4 male survivors from the Wounded Knee massacre. This is us riding it. It did snow once or twice on us, only 2 or 3 inches, so wasn't any big problem. If the massacre itself, the Army disarmed the Lakota, took their guns away from them, then opened up with cannon fire and took them out. And the next morning, they took this as Bigfoot, the Miniconjou chief, who had TB at the time and was pretty weak. So he rode in a wagon the whole time. He couldn't even ride a horse. But his frozen body the next morning was turned up and propped up for a photo op. That, and several days later, they dug a grave in the frozen ground. About 240 bodies went into it. This is overlooking horse, our leader in the headgear, and there was small prayers, and then as we went up for the ceremony around the burial site, then we went into a canter for 3 big circles, and then arrived up at the burial site. And that's for ego purposes. That's Ron his horse's thunder, and me with Ron his horse's thunder, and that's Sandra in the upper right. And this is after the ceremony. They asked us not to take pictures because it's a religious ceremony, and most people didn't. A few American tourists were there who did. This is Sandra and myself after the ceremony in front of the gravesite. Note the white flag under which the Indians were attacked. You can't see the white flag because it's white background, so it's a little bit hard to see. But see, it's a cross over that, and right behind that brick opening there is the grave itself. Everybody got off their horse, and somebody held your horse while you were going through the procedure. And we walked around it. They gave us a little piece of dirt and a little bit of tobacco, which is both very sacred to the Indians and added to the gravesite. Yeah, okay. And the pipe finally came to full circle. After Sitting Bull's cabin on Grand River just before the ride, Ron's mother gave Anna McNeil gave a picnic lunch. And she had done that. Then the pipe riding across South Dakota, desecration of the pipe at the beginning of the ride. And the mass grave site, the bodies were there. Then this is the pipe is now resting in the lobby of the Sitting Bull College, part separated with a red flannel cloth on a bed of sage. Thus, each of the persons mentioned had a role in helping the pipe complete the circle. Rosser needing a job, Custer helping him get that job, Sitting Bull giving a pipe to Rosser, and Sandra realizing her goal as being the intermediary of the last leg of the circle. Any questions, observations, or corrections? What? Well, yes, ma'am.
Dave Cabrera from Spotsylvania, and I'm involved with the Manahoe Historical Alliance. I want to thank and commend you, Orange County Historical Society. I submit that this is the first talk and the most unique talk of its kind in the Commonwealth linking the so-called Siouan linguistic culture here with the counterparts in the Dakotas, not only talking about it, but all that you invested in heart, your wife, Joanne, today. I really salute you. And I guess my other sort of question we've talked about before also with Jessica, these are two great institutions here in Orange. I've been from FAM in Fredericksburg, Spotsy, Rappahannock Historical, Germana, they all have a piece of it, but there's not an overarching story. And to what extent does Orange Historical or James Madison Museum have interest in any follow-up or ongoing? And I've proffered the idea of Speiden Fellows. We could get school students, college students further studying this work. The 250th of the Declaration's coming up, or Constitution behind that. And, you know, what about the Madison family and Colonel Madison? You know, there's some lessons, letters between Jefferson and Madison on Indigenous, and some lessons. Of course, there was a lot of sad and pain, but there's also some lessons learned then and today. There's also an interest in stitching together some of these stories across our Piedmont watershed, including PEC, Friends of Rappahannock. These certainly were our first conservationists. So I just mainly want to bow to you and your late wife and the historical side. This is an amazing talk and step for our Commonwealth to unpack what you just did. And if there's ways that the society might be interested in the future for ongoing follow-up, we'd love to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, Dave's interested in the Indians. A lot of people have misconceptions. The Manahoac Indians supposedly just died out. We don't read about them. We kind of have to remember that history is written by the white man, and we just didn't add them to the history book. They're still around. They mingle with the population. The Manahoac, some of them mixed with their cousins over there in Amherst County, the Monacan Indians, but they weren't 100% wiped out. But normally across the country, starting with New England, 80 to 95% of every tribe was wiped out with European diseases because they had no immunity to the diseases that we brought over. But when people think that they just evaporated, they didn't evaporate. What was left was mixed in. Couple of items along that line when the colonists came in on the Mayflower and the Wampanoag Indians in Massachusetts. Didn't particularly welcome, but they didn't hurt them. They helped them out, that Indians usually do. But what they found was a lot of the Indian villages in Massachusetts were empty. People had died off. And the conclusion they came to was, this is God's way of making room here for the white man. And the same thing happened over and over again when Lewis and Clark went out and going up the Missouri River. They got to the Mandan Indians. And at one time, they didn't take very many census those days, but it was estimated between 30 and 40,000 Mandan Indians were there in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And they had one round of smallpox, malaria, you name it, venereal diseases after another. And they got whittled down from 30,000 to 20,000. And in 1837, a ship came up the Yellowstone River, and it had a case of smallpox on it. And there were about 300 Monacans left, not Monacans, Mandans left. And 6 months later, there were only 37 left. That was the last time, but there were 37 of the Mandans out of the 35 or 30,000, which survived and kept some of the traditions up in North Dakota, South Dakota. Any other questions or observations? Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about what your wife found when she did the excavation of the Sagara Mound?
I'm sorry, I'm deaf in one ear and I can't hear the other.
Could you tell us a little bit about what your wife discovered, what the excavators discovered.
Oh, yeah.
In the Sagara Mound.
Yeah, okay, well, they did that for several months. Harrison, the three, yeah, you were one of the participants of it. And they did 2 cubic meter squares, and it had been excavated back in the 1890s. My guy might as well gone in there with a bulldozer. He broke up a lot of stuff, but they pulled out thousands of pieces of bone. Sandra herself classified 10,000 of them herself. Artifacts, doing all her collections. She had probably had 500 or 600 artifacts, incredible artifacts. They found a pipe. She found a soapstone bowl. I have pictures of them. That they've all been given to the historic resources in Richmond, or Mary Washington got some, and she essentially in examination of the bones, the rickets was a big thing they discovered there that were in the Indians from their diets. It was a big contribution to the knowledge, and if she hadn't done the dig, the Rapidan River would have done it for her. But there's one stone axe, which the museum across the street has, which she got out of that mound. But there are not many of those artifacts left there. There's 1 or 2 in that case right behind Dave Carvin and Frank Walker there. I see pictures of some of her works and a couple of her deals back there. Does that answer your question enough?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, can you talk about Ebola?
Oh, this thing, yeah. Well, we went on this ride with Lakota Indians, and then the next year, Sandra and I went back out there and spent about 3 or 4 days on the reservation, staying with friends that we made in the tribe. And I did a lot of my research out there with them, taking notes and talking to the Indians for the course that I took for 10 years down at Ollie, the American History from the Indigenous point of view. And I got a lot of my information on that trip, taking them out to dinner and just chatting, and a lot of notes. And the development officer of Sitting Bull College gave me this as on our second trip out, and it's just an incredible piece of beadwork. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Bill, can you explain the geographical distance between the Siouan language group in Virginia groups in Virginia to the Midwest extent? What's the,
What's the background? Why are they
yeah,
that big area of Virginia spoke Sioux, and then there's 400 or 500 miles, 600
Exactly.
miles maybe before you run into Sioux again?
that's my question. Why, when, how?
Well, I really can't answer that fully. It'd be nice to research it, and to the point where I'd know what's the source for them both. It's probably obviously from the original source, and some moved west, and the language stuck. But I do not have a good answer for that.
Okay.
They're like a lot of languages. I mean, in New Guinea, for example, there are 1,000 languages in New Guinea. There's a different language in every valley, and most people there speak 7 or 8 different languages. And that's it. Yes.
I can't speak to it personally, but Victoria Ferguson of the Monacan Nation says that one of their stories is that King Monak came from the West, I guess through what we think of as North Carolina, and founded the Monacan Nation. That's one of their stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of aspects of it. The more research you do, the more you find out about it, and also the more conflicts in history you find. Yeah, which makes it kind of interesting. So some of you guys may have may have heard of the contact between Rosser and Custer, and at the Civil War, and Frank can probably add to this tale if I can find it. I would have had it, but it was the thank you. Is that no, that's not it. Here, I thought I was so organized, and then we get down to the nitty gritty. There we go. Yeah, this is just a little note. On opposite sides of the Civil War, Generals Custer and Rosser would cross numerous paths numerous times, often fighting the same battles and frequently encountering each other face to face. And happenstance of this type had occurred at the Battle of Tom's Brook, also known as the Woodstock Races, on October 1864. In this instance, Custer defeated his schoolmate, forcing him to retire quickly from the field. In the process, he managed to capture Rosser's wardrobe wagon. Rosser quickly responded his defeat by sending Custer a note and a gift. He called him Fanny. Dear Fanny, you may have made me take a few steps back here today, but I will get even with you tomorrow. Please accept my good wishes for this little gift, a pair of your drawers that were captured at Trevilian Station. Signed, Tex. Custer later responded to this gesture by shipping a gold lace Confederate gray coat to Ross's wife. Dear friend, thanks for sending me up so many new things, but would you please direct your tailor to make the coattails of your next uniform a trifle shorter? Signed, best regards, George Armstrong Custer. But they're good friends. All right, now any close me to lose. If there's any other questions? Well, yes.
Just one observation on the question about where they came from to come here. I got from the Smithsonian, a Cheyenne Lakota scholar, Andy Van Hoosen, Indian Museum, her professor at Black Hills State, and one of the fame who passed away a year ago. But we had correspondence with her, Dr. Jace McCrory, Lakotan scholar. And we discussed this very question that was raised. And she said there are certain theories called circle migration of movement east to west or west to east. And likewise, there are certain customs and oral traditions of Dakota Sioux coming from the east west. And we may never know, which side of the circle started first. There's also, the land bridge and various theories from Mongolia, et cetera. But I think this idea of exchange and movement is also what the Potawatomi Indian Brad Hatch today talks about. There was a lot of movement east and west, and I just want to say, Philip raised that question about Victoria Ferguson's a dear friend with the Monacan Nation, and Ann behind me, their husband. They live up in Old Rag and Rappahannock County area in a hollow that has what could be burial mounds, but also a lot of artifactual and historical stories about disbursement, as you said, into that part of the watershed. So again, kudos to you, Bill, because that circle migration today is reflected in kind of the heart and exchange. And I just hope we can keep it going. And I've met also descendants of Wounded Knee and others out that they are very grateful that people like the Speidens care enough to do what you did. And I'm glad you started the talk with Matiku Yayasin, or we're all related, E pluribus unum. And I think that you kicked off something that I just hope can continue in new ways of circle and exchange. Thank you.
Yeah, it's that. Well, one of the things Sandra did was, there's a lot of controversy there about keeping Indian bones, and after they checked them out for a little bit, she took all the bones and she gifts them to the Monacan Indians. Not Monacan, Monacan Indians in Amherst County. Yeah, so they eventually got their own bones for reburial. They were cousins to the Manahoics. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, let me. Wow, I got a captive audience. A little commercial here. The books that are available back there. There are 3 of them that I've written. The Letters to Tyler is the first one that I wrote to my grandson, so he'd know something about his grandmother, Sandra, who died shortly after he was born. The book was given him on his 16th birthday. This includes local, state, and national and international history, including history anecdotes in 1795, woven into the evolution of a Virginia family. The Speidens settled into Northern Virginia and were involved in all the above history. Prime sources for over 400 letters from both sides of the family, going back to the 1830s, I happened upon in the attic, having the biggest attic in the family, and my mother's pen pal letters with a World War I Belgian Army lieutenant in 1918. Bathroom reading, the other one is local, state, and national historical anecdotes involving farming, unforgettable characters, man and peace, Jim Crow touching on critical race theory subjects, and the enjoyment of living in a rural life. Most short stories are easily, the book is easily picked up and put down, so there's no way you can lose a thread. Game Plan is my last book I just wrote. It's literally hot off the press, arriving from the publisher last Wednesday. A little story you might be able to relate to on that, because I sent it to the publisher Thursday week back, and Friday morning my computer crashed. And so we were lucky in that department. But Game Plans addresses a life, family, and travels of the Speiden family, college life in the 50s, historical events, travels to 4 continents with takeaway knowledge, including observations of the human condition, local and state issues, people's stories interwoven with the humorous side of human relations and events. The focus is on Virginia and Orange County state and national perspectives. The origins of cross burning and the last cross burnings in Orange County are addressed. It includes several stories involving reenacting with oxen in 12 states, our main source of draft power until the 1850s. Story of 2 weeks of riding with the Lakota Indians to the Wounded Knee site is in the last book. Introduction by Jeff Poole, the former editor of the Orange County Review when it was a paper. All have a touch of sex to complete the human reality. All proceeds are for the benefit of the Orange County Historical Society. Check out the tables of contents to find out what might interest you. And a special sale for you today, if you buy all 3, you get $5 off the book. All Historical Society programs are available to see through our thanks to Phil Audibert and Mark Herrerath. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the refreshments out front that Jane set out for us, and take a look at the book. You might make a mistake and learn something. Appreciate it. Thank you.